So, with the disappointing series finale of the DCEU now in cinemas, in the form of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, I thought we'd go back to the beginning today to look at the very start of the franchise with Man of Steel from 2013 and also 2016's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. After watching The Lost Kingdom, I went back and rewatched these two movies again. And they really reminded me of how far the DCEU has drifted from Zack Snyder's original vision and tone. As I've discussed several times now, most modern superhero movies have descended into being frivolous, borderline comedy action movies. Light, colourful popcorn movies that have formulaic plots, average to sometimes poor CGI, generic character journeys, no real clear message, and stock supervillains with stereotypical bad guy motivations. The films feel cookie cutter these days. And this is ultimately where the DCEU and the Marvel Cinematic Universe have ended up, with little to separate them in terms of quality, production style, tone, and overall narrative format and characterization. But back in 2013, and indeed 2016, the Snyderverse DCEU was a very different animal to the MCU. Back then, the DC movies were serious and tonally darker, without being depressing and edgy dark. They were intense, deep, and highly atmospheric movies that, despite being about fantastical superheroes, at least attempted to incorporate grounded elements into the universe. At the time when the first trailers for Man of Steel were released, I was hoping this would be the most grounded and realistic take on the character of Superman yet. The trailers showed him living an ordinary life, jobbing around, working as a fisherman, the mundane aspects of life possibly adding to the believability of the story and making for a welcome contrast to the fantastical superhero stuff. I had hoped that Christopher Nolan's involvement as producer would contribute to making this the kind of Batman Begins of the Superman universe. I wanted to see a new take on Superman, where he wasn't completely invincible or all-powerful, a comic book movie more like the film Unbreakable, but only Superman eventually learns to fly. But that's unfortunately not exactly what we got with Man of Steel. The film dives straight into the hard sci-fi fantasy stuff from the get-go, showing us the alien world and advanced technologies of Krypton. When we finally meet Clark Kent working as a fisherman and rendering assistance to some men on an oil rig, we see an early example of his incredible superpowers almost immediately. So I was disappointed that Clark's amazing abilities were being showcased so early on in the movie and so gratuitously. I wasn't particularly taken by Man of Steel at the time when I first watched it. The fight scenes with Zod and his soldiers by the end of the movie were kind of over the top in my view. The action is too fast, it's too shaky, there's a lot of smashing through buildings, high-speed impacts during flight. It's all too frenetic and difficult to focus on and really see what's happening. It can be very difficult to keep track of what's going on. But I've grown to appreciate the film's respectful take on the source material and the fact that it is a heartfelt and serious movie, and Snyder was trying to do something genuinely unique. There's no cheap gags, the villain's motivations make sense. He was a soldier, bred to protect Krypton and preserve its people, because Kryptonians were all artificially born by that point, with their roles in society decided for them. But Kal-El, Superman, was different. He was the first child born naturally on Krypton for generations, and unlike Zod, he could choose his own path. Man of Steel is a great first chapter in the DCEU, and looking back, I really think I was too hard on that movie at the time. Likewise, I've really grown to love Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. An incredible musical soundtrack as well. But if you're not watching the ultimate edition of the movie, then just don't bother. The extended version is the best and provides far more context and important scenes, and I think these scenes were really vital for the story. It is another serious superhero movie. There's a lot of characters in this one as well. The film, unfortunately, had to introduce the other Justice League characters, with Wonder Woman having a sizable enough role in the movie. As a result, it feels very jam-packed, very cluttered, and there's just probably too much going on, really. What I do like about the movie is that the storytelling is not your conventional superhero movie. The plot takes a good while to really get going, but I never found the film to be slow or plodding. it takes its time to build all of the various intricate plot elements before building to the big fight, of course, between Batman and Superman, which, of course, I wish was longer, but it's still wonderful, and it's very well executed. I don't have an issue with the moment where Batman stops short of killing Superman because he tells him that Luthor is going to kill his mother Martha, right? He says the name Martha, and of course, Bruce Wayne's mother was also called Martha. Now, I know a lot of people simplify this scene to, your mother has the same first name as my mother. Okay, let's be friends now. I mean, it's sort of that ridiculous, but I don't think it's that simple. Throughout the whole movie, we learn how much darker and more violent and angry Bruce Wayne has become over the years, especially his growing hatred of Superman. And yet, he still has his own trauma and grief following the murder of his parents when he was a child. And it's that grief that still allows him to feel something other than hatred for Superman. So when Clark says the name Martha, Bruce's morality, humanity, and empathy suddenly comes back to him. He learns that Superman is a man much like him. But as I say, the film takes its time to unravel the plot, and so a scene can begin and you mightn't immediately know how it relates to the overall plot when it's happening. The characters are actually ahead of the audience when it comes to certain plot threads, which makes for a nice change actually, because usually superhero movies are predictable and formulaic to the point where the audience is well ahead of the characters. So it's nice to actually have a story that you, as a member of the audience, have to really think about. I can completely understand, however, why people don't like Batman v Superman. It's more hard-hitting and brutal than even the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. It is a long movie, and the story could have been condensed a bit, at least on the page. The problem is that the theatrical version just cuts out way too much important stuff, and there's a lot of really good story context that's lost as a result. The Ultimate Edition addresses this by giving you the entire story as it was intended without compromises, but the movie isn't going to be every comic book fan's cup of tea. Snyder was clearly trying to build his DCEU world perhaps too quickly, and as a result, the film is jam-packed with stuff that doesn't directly relate to the immediate story. The setup for the future metahumans, Cyborg, The Flash, Aquaman, Wonder Woman's backstory, the nightmare dream sequence of the possible future Earth, and of course, the appearance of a future version of The Flash with a cryptic message to Bruce Wayne about how Lois Lane is the key. I think looking back, you can see how there was a loss of confidence with the Snyderverse version of the DCEU, and perhaps the studio felt it best to try to appeal to Marvel and general audiences by changing the tone, look and feel of the films to be more like the MCU. It appeared Warner were desperate to play catch-up with the MCU and make their own film series to answer it, complete with the DC version of the Avengers in the form of the Justice League. When that film was finally released, it had been heavily altered from the original vision that Zack Snyder conceived of. The production issues regarding that film and why it turned out so differently than intended are already well documented, so I won't go over them again, but suffice to say, the Joss Whedon cut of the movie was compromised by a lot of reshoots, the removal of an hour of original footage, undercooked CGI, some awful airbrushing of Henry Cavill's mustache, and of course too many silly jokes designed to lighten the film's tone. Now, I am very glad that we finally got to see the original Snyder cut of the movie in all of its glory some years later. It was released in 2021. The Snyder cut of Justice League is far superior to what we got in cinemas, albeit quite an investment of time at over 4 hours long. I think the fundamental problem with the original vision of the Snyderverse DCEU, from Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, through to the Snyder cut of Justice League, is that it didn't present a hopeful vision of the world which audiences typically want in a superhero movie. Now, that complaint makes total sense, I get it. However, as dark as the world presented in those films was, I don't think it was necessarily a bleak or dystopian one either, but that's just my opinion. Many of you may disagree. However, rather than just injecting a bit more hope into the film series, which would have been fine, there was also far too much silly humour. We've seen this in recent years with the likes of the Shazam films, with The Flash, with Aquaman, and with Blue Beetle. and it began to make the DCEU practically indistinguishable from the MCU. The early films I've mentioned really divided critics and fans, but given how poor superhero movies are now, I think in time audiences will look back at Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and the Snyder Cut of Justice League with a new appreciation for what Zack Snyder was trying to achieve with the DCEU movies. Considering we never got a second Man of Steel, or a standalone Batman movie with Ben Affleck, or a second Justice League movie, there's a real sense of what might have been. Oh well. In the end, we got what we got, and I think in time, many people will come to realize that those early movies in the series were perhaps better than they remember. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. The Dave Cullen Show is made possible by you, my generous subscribers. If you'd like to support my work, head on over to my Subscribe Star, linked below in the description box, and for a pledge of as little as $1 per month, you can help to keep the show going. I'm also doing one-to-one monthly subscriber chats. Thanks again. Take care.